The scratch of pen on paper cut through the low hum of hydraulic lifts and the metallic clang of tools echoing across Hangar 7. Harrison Drake didn't look up from the divorce decree spread across the metal desk, its legal terminology blurring into white noise against the familiar scent of jet fuel and machine oil that had defined 3 decades of his professional life, or at least the version of that life Victoria Sterling believed existed. His hand moved across the signature line without hesitation. The trembling had stopped 72 hours ago, the night he'd stood outside the private office at 11 p.m. and watched through the half-open door as his wife of 5 years pressed her lips against Ryan Garrett's mouth, her fingers tangled in the test pilot's hair, while the grandmother's diamond on her left hand caught the fluorescent light. Harrison hadn't stormed in, hadn't shouted accusations or demanded explanations. He'd simply turned, walked to his F-150 pickup truck, 17 years old, rust spots on the rear quarter panel, radio that worked only when Connecticut weather cooperated, and driven home through streets he'd navigated 1,000 times, while his vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall until the garage door closed behind him. The conference room at Brooks Aviation occupied a corner of the maintenance facility, industrial windows offering a view of the Bombardier CRJ 900 sitting on jacks, its Pratt & Whitney engines exposed for the turbine blade inspection Harrison had been supervising before the lawyer called. Navy coveralls bore his name in white stitching above the left pocket. H. Drake, Senior Consultant. The fabric smelled like JP-8 fuel and the particular metallic tang that came from grinding titanium components in sub-zero temperatures. Victoria sat across from him in a black Armani suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment, though he'd stopped questioning her wardrobe choices years ago. She'd explained away the designer pieces as thrift store finds, estate sale treasures, gifts from a wealthy aunt in Boston who didn't exist. Another lie in an architecture of deception Harrison was only beginning to comprehend. Her Hermes Birkin bag rested against the chair leg, $40,000 of hand-stitched leather that no accountant making $55,000 annually could justify owning. The scent of Chanel No. 5 drifted across the table, $300 per bottle, replacing the drugstore fragrance he'd bought her their first Christmas together, when she'd smiled and murmured appreciation before the expensive version appeared on her dresser with some story about a Black Friday sale. Her voice emerged cold and efficient as a pre-flight checklist. The formality of it stung worse than the infidelity, this reduction of 5 years to contractual obligation and asset division. You just need to sign, Harrison. The prenuptial agreement is straightforward. You keep the house. I'm taking the joint account. No alimony requested from either party. Harrison's head came up slowly, his blue eyes, the same shade as the October sky visible through the hangar's open bay doors, meeting hers for the first time since she'd sat down. The fluorescent light caught the gray threading through his dark hair, more salt than pepper now at 52. Lines creased the corners of his eyes from 2 decades of squinting at maintenance manuals and aircraft schematics in inadequate lighting. From long nights in his home workshop developing the bypass duct engine design that represented his life's best engineering work. The question came out rougher than he'd intended, edged with something between confusion and dawning comprehension. Prenuptial agreement. 5 years ago, you told me you were just an accountant at a mid-level Hartford firm. Why would someone making $55,000 a year need a prenup? Something flickered behind Victoria's brown eyes. Not quite guilt, more like the expression of a pilot who'd noticed a warning light on the instrument panel, but hadn't yet decided whether to declare an emergency. She broke eye contact, her gaze sliding to the window where 2 mechanics in coveralls were towing a fuel truck past the Bombardier. The words came out too practiced, too smooth, rehearsed answers to questions she'd anticipated. I'm cautious. My parents taught me to protect myself financially. The laugh that escaped Harrison's throat held no humor, just the hollow sound of understanding arriving 3 years too late. Or maybe 5 years too late. Or perhaps from the moment he'd pulled over on Interstate 95 and offered to help a stranded motorist whose Lexus had conveniently broken down 2 miles from the Brooks Aviation facility where Harrison worked. Or maybe you planned to leave from the beginning. The blueprints on the desk caught his peripheral vision. Detailed cross-sections of combustion chamber designs and airflow calculations representing 14-hour days in the engineering bay, weekends spent running computational fluid dynamics models on his aging home computer, while Victoria claimed to attend yoga classes that apparently didn't exist. The bypass duct design could reduce fuel consumption by 18% in cruise flight. He'd verified the numbers 3 times, checked them against wind tunnel data Brooks Aviation's chief aerodynamicist had helped him gather during off hours, worth millions in licensing fees if a major manufacturer picked it up, worth even more in long-term efficiency gains for airlines operating on razor-thin profit margins. His mind dragged him backward against his will, 5 years rewinding in painful clarity to the September afternoon when he'd spotted the silver Lexus pulled onto the I-95 shoulder, hood up, hazard lights flashing. He'd been driving home from a consultation meeting, the kind of meeting that happened in Drake Aerospace Defense's Manhattan headquarters, where Harrison signed contracts worth hundreds of millions while wearing Tom Ford suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But that afternoon, he'd been in his work disguise. Worn jeans, faded MIT t-shirt from a campus visit. She'd been staring at the engine bay with the particular expression of someone who knew they were looking at a problem, but had no idea what they were seeing. Harrison had pulled over because that's what you did when someone needed help. The same way his father had stopped for stranded motorists on Oregon highways during he'd waved it off, suggested coffee while the engine cooled enough to work on safely. They'd sat in a roadside diner on Route 1, talking about Victoria had laughed at his stories about Madison, her whole face transforming from stressed motorist into something warm and genuine. Or he'd thought it was genuine. Turned out he was as good at reading people as he was at rebuilding turbofan engines, which was to say completely incompetent when it came to anything outside his technical expertise. They dated 8 months before he'd proposed in that same diner, sitting in the same booth, with his grandmother's modest diamond ring that had survived 2 world wars and his first marriage to Jennifer. Victoria had cried when she'd said yes, real tears that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than performance. Or maybe everything had been performance from the moment she'd staged the breakdown on I-95, calculating that a widowed engineer with a preteen daughter would be vulnerable, that a man hiding from his billionaire identity would never question a woman who seemed content with a simple life in a 3-bedroom house in suburban Connecticut. The pen finished its path across the signature line, Harrison Drake, written in the blocky capitals he'd learned drafting mechanical drawings by hand before CAD software had taken over the industry. He pushed the folder across the desk, the metal surface still bearing coffee rings from the morning production meeting where Brooks Aviation's operations director had announced another round of budget cuts that would delay Harrison's engine project indefinitely. Not that Harrison actually needed Brooks Aviation's budget, since Drake Aerospace Defense could fund the entire research program with a rounding error from quarterly profits. But maintaining the fiction required accepting the limitations of his assumed identity. Done. The agreement says you get the joint account. There's $12,000 in there. Take it all. I don't need it. Victoria's hand moved fast, snatching the folder before he could change his mind. Her fingers, manicured in a way that should have been a red flag for someone claiming to be a mid-level accountant, flipped through pages, checking each signature placement like she was reviewing a critical contract. When she found everything in order, something in her posture relaxed, tension releasing that Harrison only now recognized as fear. She'd been afraid he'd fight her, demand explanations, make her justify the betrayal. She stood, the chair scraping against concrete floor loud enough to make one of the mechanics outside glance toward the conference room window. Her bag came up over her shoulder, the leather supple in a way that only came from the kind of craftsmanship that charged premium prices. Harrison tracked the movement with the detached observation of an engineer noting a mechanical process, cataloging details he'd missed during 5 years of deliberate blindness. The pause stretched long enough that Harrison wondered if she'd leave without speaking. Then she stopped halfway to the door, her back to him, shoulders rigid beneath a tailored suit jacket. The words came out quieter than anything she'd said since sitting down, carrying something that might have been actual regret. "Harrison, you're the best man I've ever known. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of this." The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slamming exit would have been. Harrison sat motionless, staring at the empty chair across from him while the sounds of the hangar filtered through the walls. Pneumatic tools, rolling equipment, the steady background hum of compressors and generators that was the soundtrack of his working life. His eyes dropped to the blueprints, to the precision lines and calculated angles that made sense in ways human behavior never would. His phone vibrated against his hip, Madison's name lighting up the screen, her contact photo showing her at 15, wearing safety goggles in the school's engineering lab, grinning at the camera while holding a circuit board she'd just finished soldering. He answered on the third ring, keeping his voice steady through. Harrison checked his watch, a stainless steel Seiko he wore over the coveralls, hiding the Patek Philippe Nautilus underneath that was worth more than most people earned in 5 years. The Seiko showed 3:45. School let out at 3:15. He pushed to his feet, his knees protesting the sudden movement after sitting motionless for 40 minutes while signing away his second marriage. "I'm sorry, kid. Got held up at work. I'm heading to the truck now." The drive to Aviation Technical High School took 18 minutes in light traffic, the route carrying him past suburban sprawl that had consumed Connecticut's farmland over the past 30 years. The F-150's radio stayed off, leaving Harrison alone with thoughts that churned uselessly like a turbine engine running without load. The October afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, warm enough to need air conditioning despite the fall season. Madison waited on the front steps of the school's main building, her backpack covered in patches from engineering competitions and robotics clubs. She'd inherited Jennifer's dark hair and her mother's quick mind, combined with Harrison's stubborn refusal to accept that something couldn't be understood if you studied it long enough. At 16, she was already taking college-level physics, had been accepted into an early admission engineering program at MIT that let high school juniors audit undergraduate courses, a program Harrison's anonymous 7-figure donation had helped expand, though Madison didn't know that detail. She climbed into the truck without speaking, her eyes going straight to her father's face with the particular intensity she'd developed after Jennifer's death 10 years ago, when 11-year-old Madison had appointed herself guardian of her father's emotional state. Harrison had tried to shield her from the worst of grief then, the same way he was trying now to hide the particular emptiness that came from having your trust shattered by someone you'd let past every defense. The silence lasted until they were 3 blocks from the school. Then Madison's voice cut through, flat and knowing. "You signed them, didn't you?" Harrison's hands tightened on the steering wheel, the worn leather familiar under his palms from 17 years of driving this truck through Connecticut winters and summer heat, one of the few genuine elements in the fiction of his life as struggling senior consultant. Yeah, the sound that came from the passenger seat might have been a suppressed sob or just a sharp exhale. When Harrison glanced over, Madison was staring out the window, her jaw set in the stubborn lines she'd inherited from him, the one that appeared when she was fighting tears and refusing to let them fall. Her voice came out smaller than he'd heard it in years, younger. Did she say why she was leaving? The truth stuck in Harrison's throat, that he'd caught Victoria with another man, that the explanation had been humiliatingly simple and completely devastating, that his wife of 5 years had been cheating with a test pilot who joined Brooks Aviation 6 months ago. But Madison didn't need that particular wound added to the collection of losses she'd already suffered in her short life. Jennifer's death from ovarian cancer when Madison was 6 had been traumatic enough. 3 years of hospitals and failed treatments that had drained savings Harrison had deliberately let deplete to maintain his cover identity. Even though Drake Aerospace Defense's resources could have bought the best experimental treatments in the world, he settled for a version of truth that wouldn't add unnecessary damage. People fall out of love sometimes, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anything was wrong with us. Just means she wasn't the right fit for our family. The words tasted like the careful lies he'd told Madison when Jennifer was dying. The reassurances that mommy would get better, even as the oncologist's expression made it clear they were measuring time in weeks. He'd gotten good at protective dishonesty, at shielding his daughter from adult pain that would land on her shoulders soon enough without him accelerating the timeline. The house appeared at the end of Oak Street, a modest three-bedroom ranch that Harrison had bought 12 years ago when the Air Force retirement pay and his Brooks Aviation consultant salary, the only income Madison knew about, had supposedly put homeownership within reach. The mortgage was manageable, the neighborhood safe, the commute reasonable. Jennifer had lived here 2 years before cancer took her. Madison had grown up in the second bedroom, its walls covered in engineering posters and mathematics competition ribbons. Victoria had moved in 5 years ago after a wedding ceremony at City Hall with Madison as the only witness, a simple affair that Victoria had claimed to prefer over traditional church ceremony. Harrison had half expected her to want. Inside, the house felt larger than it had 3 days ago, emptier in ways that had nothing to do with physical space. Victoria had taken her clothes, her books, the kitchen gadgets she'd insisted on buying despite Harrison's objections that their existing equipment worked fine. She'd left the furniture they'd purchased together, the wedding photos from the hallway, small mercies that felt more like she couldn't be bothered to pack them than actual consideration for Harrison's feelings. Harrison moved through the familiar routine of home arrival. Keys in the bowl by the door, work boots swapped for house slippers, coveralls stripped off and tossed in the utility room hamper. Beneath them, he wore jeans and a faded University of Connecticut t-shirt from a campus visit with Madison last year, back when Victoria had still been part of their family unit, still playing the role of supportive stepmother, while whatever scheme her brother Marcus had devised unfolded in shadows Harrison hadn't thought to examine. In the kitchen, he pulled ingredients from the refrigerator by muscle memory, beef stew components that could simmer for hours and taste better for the wait. Jennifer had taught him to cook during her first remission, insisting he needed to know how to feed Madison proper meals instead of relying on frozen dinners and takeout. The lessons had stuck, became part of his identity as a father who could handle domestic responsibilities alongside the technical demands of keeping aircraft airworthy, or in his case, running an $8 billion defense contractor while maintaining the fiction of blue-collar engineering consultant. The rhythmic sound of chopping vegetables created meditation, the knife work requiring just enough attention to quiet the louder thoughts. Brown the meat, deglaze the pan, add stock and aromatics. The familiar chemical reactions of cooking, Maillard browning, collagen breakdown, flavor compound extraction, followed rules as reliable as thermodynamics. Heat plus time plus proper ingredients yielded predictable results. Unlike human relationships that seem to operate on principles Harrison had never successfully decoded despite 5 decades of life experience and multiple advanced degrees. Madison appeared in the kitchen doorway, her backpack dropped in the hall, still wearing the aviation technical high school hoodie that marked her as part of the engineering track. She'd changed from school shoes to fuzzy socks with cartoon airplanes that Harrison had bought her for Christmas, back when their family had consisted of 3 people instead of 2. She pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten thousands of meals, where Harrison had helped her with homework and college applications, where Victoria had sat across from them pretending to be part of their family while secretly serving as corporate spy for her brother's failing aerospace company. Her iPad emerged from somewhere, the tablet they'd bought her for school that she used for everything from engineering simulations to social media stalking. The silence stretched while Harrison added potatoes to the pot, adjusted heat, set the timer for the long simmer that would break down tougher cuts of beef into tenderness. He was reaching for plates when Madison's voice stopped him, carrying a tension that made his parental alarm systems activate. The question came out carefully, like she'd been rehearsing it. "Dad, do you know who Victoria really is?" Harrison turned from the stove, wooden spoon still in hand, confusion overriding his grief for a moment. "What kind of question is that?" Madison's fingers were moving across the iPad screen, her face lit by the glow, her expression serious in a way that made her look older than 16. Older than she should have to be, shouldering adult concerns because her father had failed to protect her from the consequences of his own poor judgment. "I've been researching. Victoria Reeves doesn't have any records before 2019. No college transcripts, no employment history, no social media presence. It's like she appeared out of nowhere the year before she met you." The spoon clattered against the pot as Harrison set it down too hard, his engineer's mind already running through implications, while his emotional core rejected them wholesale. The systematic nature of Madison's investigation shouldn't have surprised him. She'd inherited his analytical approach to problems, his refusal to accept surface explanations when deeper patterns demanded exploration. "You investigated Victoria?" The words came out sharper than he'd intended, defensive in a way that embarrassed him immediately. Madison's head came up, her eyes meeting his with a particular stubborn expression that appeared when she knew she was right about something and refused to back down despite social pressure. She didn't flinch from his tone. "I didn't trust her from the beginning, Dad. Women who carry vintage Hermes Birkin bags don't work as accountants making $55,000 a year. That bag cost $40,000. And that perfume she wore, Chanel No. 5, runs $150 for a small bottle. The way she handled silverware at dinner, the casual familiarity with wine she claimed to know nothing about, how she never made mistakes with formal place settings, even though she said she grew up working class." The observations hit Harrison like foreign object damage to a turbine blade, each one small but cumulatively devastating. He'd missed every single red flag, too grateful for a second chance at partnership after Jennifer's death to question whether Victoria's story held together under scrutiny. A 16-year-old had seen through the performance his 52-year-old grief and loneliness had rendered invisible. He moved to the table, pulling out the chair across from Madison with suddenly unsteady hands. The Patek Philippe on his wrist, still hidden under his sleeve out of habit, felt heavier than its actual weight, a reminder of all the truths he'd concealed in pursuit of authentic connection. "Show me what you found." Madison's fingers worked across the screen, pulling up a website that loaded in the clean corporate style of a major aerospace company. Sterling Aerospace Corporation dominated the header, the logo a stylized wing that Harrison recognized from industry publications. The company competed directly with several of Drake Aerospace Defense's civilian aviation divisions, undercutting bids and poaching talent with higher salaries that a smaller operation couldn't match. Or rather, salaries they couldn't match if Harrison hadn't been deliberately limiting Brooks Aviation's apparent resources to maintain his cover. She navigated to the leadership team page, scrolling past headshots of executives Harrison vaguely recognized from conference appearances and trade show presentations. Then she stopped on a photo that made Harrison's lungs forget how to process oxygen. Victoria Sterling stared out from the screen, except her hair was styled differently, swept back in a professional cut that probably cost more than Harrison spent on haircuts in a year at the local barbershop he visited to maintain his consultant persona. She wore a charcoal suit that screamed executive power, not the business casual pieces she'd worn to her fictional accounting job. Below the photo, text identified her as Victoria Martinez Sterling, Director of Research and Development. Madison's voice seemed to come from underwater, muffled by the roaring in Harrison's ears, as 5 years of marriage rewrote themselves in his understanding. "I'll read the bio. Victoria Martinez Sterling, Director of Research and Development, Sterling Aerospace Corporation. B.S. Aerospace Engineering, Purdue University. Executive Leadership Program, Wharton School of Business. 15 years of experience in aerospace engineering and corporate operations. Daughter of late CEO Howard Sterling, sister to current CEO Marcus Sterling. Previously served as Senior VP of Operations before assuming Director of R&D role in 2015. The kitchen tilted, or maybe Harrison's sense of balance had stopped functioning properly. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, while his brain tried to reconcile 5 years of marriage with this new data set. Victoria Reeves didn't exist. She'd never existed. He'd been married to Victoria Sterling, Director of Research and Development for his company's primary competitor, daughter of aerospace royalty, a woman who probably made 10 times his supposed consultant salary and had access to resources Harrison could only pretend not to possess. The blueprints, the engine design, the technical conversations where he'd explained his bypass duct concepts in detail because Victoria had asked interested questions about his work, seemed genuinely curious about the engineering challenges he faced. 3 months ago, he'd walked her through the entire combustion chamber redesign in his home workshop, shown her the CAD models, explained the variable geometry mechanism that allowed efficiency optimization across different flight regimes. She'd asked smart questions, understood the thermodynamics, offered suggestions that had actually improved the cooling passage layout. 2 weeks ago, Sterling Aerospace had announced their new engine program, the Sterling EcoJet, marketed as a revolutionary approach to fuel efficiency in regional aircraft. Harrison hadn't paid much attention beyond noting that a competitor had beaten someone to market with a similar concept. He'd been too busy dealing with budget cuts at Brooks Aviation and Victoria's increasingly distant behavior to read the technical specifications in detail. His voice came out damaged, stripped of the careful control he usually maintained. Pull up the Sterling EcoJet announcement. Madison's fingers moved quickly, navigating to Sterling's press release page. The announcement loaded with promotional images of a turbofan engine that made Harrison's heart stop. The external cowling design was identical to his blueprints. The bypass duct geometry matched his CAD models down to the radius specifications on the turning vanes. Even the composite material callouts in the technical specifications reflected his research into thermal-resistant polymers for high-temperature applications. They'd stolen his work. Victoria Sterling had married him, lived in his house, slept in his bed, and systematically extracted 2 years of research and development that Harrison had poured his savings and free time into developing. Or rather, the savings he'd pretended to pour in, since Drake Aerospace Defense's resources were essentially unlimited, but the fiction of struggling consultant demanded he appear financially constrained. The bypass duct design represented 14-hour days, weekends spent in the engineering lab running simulations, early mornings before his supposed work at Brooks, reviewing fluid dynamics calculations, worth millions in licensing fees if implemented correctly, worth even more in the competitive advantage it would give any manufacturer that brought it to market first. Worth enough that Marcus Sterling had apparently sent his sister to seduce and spy on a man he believed was just a talented engineer at a small aviation firm, never suspecting that Harrison Drake, senior consultant, was actually Harrison Drake, billionaire CEO of one of the largest defense contractors in North America. The laugh that escaped his throat sounded unhinged, even to his own ears, bitter and sharp, and edge was something close to hysteria. She stole my engine design. Madison's hand reached across the table, covering her 16-year-old fingers, surprisingly strong, against skin that suddenly felt cold despite the kitchen's warmth. Dad, do you have proof? Original files, timestamps, anything that shows you developed it first? The question snapped Harrison's brain back into analytical mode, the engineer's training overriding the emotional breakdown threatening to swamp him. He pushed away from the table, moving to the small home office off the kitchen, where his desktop computer sat surrounded by stacks of technical journals and aerospace engineering textbooks. The visible markers of his consultant identity while the real work happened in Drake Aerospace Defense's state-of-the-art research facilities in Manhattan. Madison followed, her iPad still glowing with Victoria Sterling's corporate headshot, the image of a woman Harrison had never actually met, despite sharing a bed with her for 5 years. His computer booted slowly, the aging hardware a reminder that Harrison put his supposed money into Madison's education and house maintenance, not personal technology upgrades. Another element of the careful fiction he'd constructed. The file directory loaded, showing folders organized by project and date. He navigated to the bypass duct research, opening the earliest CAD files. The timestamps told their story clearly. Initial concept sketches dated back 26 months. Detailed design work had consumed the following year. CFD simulations, structural analysis, thermal modeling, all time-stamped and saved in formats that included metadata, proving when they'd been created and by whom. Harrison had been meticulous about documentation, the military training and engineering discipline combining to create records that would stand up to any patent dispute. More importantly, he'd filed a provisional patent application 18 months ago through Drake Aerospace Defense's legal team, paying the fees out of his actual corporate resources while maintaining the fiction that he'd scraped together money from his consultant's salary. The application was still pending in the patent office bureaucracy, waiting for an examiner to review the claims and issue a full patent. But the filing date established his priority, proved he'd invented the technology before Sterling had announced their version. Madison was reading over his shoulder, her quick mind processing the implications with a kind of analytical speed that made Harrison simultaneously proud and concerned about the burdens she carried. You have everything you need for a lawsuit. Original designs, timestamps going back 2 years, patent filing that predates their announcement by 16 months. Dad, you could take them down for intellectual property theft. The words hung in the air while Harrison stared at 26 months of work condensed into gigabytes of technical data. His life's best engineering achievement, the innovation that was supposed to secure Madison's college fund and maybe finance his retirement when he eventually stepped down from Drake Aerospace Defense. Except Madison's college fund was already secured by a trust worth $50 million she didn't know existed. And Harrison's retirement would involve managing a personal fortune worth $8.2 billion that Victoria had never suspected. He reached for his phone, pulling up contacts until he found the listing for Mitchell Carson. Carson had been the squadron's JAG officer during Harrison's Air Force years, had transitioned to civilian patent law after retirement. They'd stayed in touch through Christmas cards and occasional phone calls, the kind of military friendship that survived separation in time zones. Carson also served as Drake Aerospace Defense's chief intellectual property counsel, though in that capacity he knew Harrison as CEO rather than struggling consultant. Carson answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the gravel of a 30-year smoking habit he'd finally kicked. Harrison Drake, been a while since I heard from you in your Connecticut persona. What's going on? The explanation took 15 minutes, Harrison laying out the timeline while Madison pulled up supporting documents on her iPad. Carson listened without interrupting, the occasional grunt indicating he was taking notes. When Harrison finished, silence stretched long enough that he wondered if the call had dropped. Then Carson's voice came back, grim with professional assessment. Harrison, this is complicated. You have ironclad evidence, timestamps, patent filing, development records that would convince any court you're the original inventor. But you're fighting this as Harrison Drake, the consultant, which means limited resources against Sterling Aerospace's legal army. If you reveal your real identity, you win immediately, but you blow the cover you've maintained for 5 years. Harrison stared at the computer screen where his best engineering work stared back in wireframe CAD models and mathematical proofs. Stolen by a woman he'd loved, weaponized by a company that had sent that woman to seduce him under false pretenses. What do you recommend? Carson's exhale carried static over the connection. That depends on what you want to achieve. Justice, Revenge? Protection of your intellectual property? Each goal requires different strategy. In Harrison, once you start this fight, there's no taking it back. Sterling will come after you with everything they have, and secrets have a way of surfacing during litigation discovery. The call ended with Carson promising to review the documents Madison would scan and email, with warnings about preliminary injunctions and discovery processes that could expose not just Harrison's dual identity, but Drake Aerospace Defense's proprietary technologies if Sterling's lawyers got aggressive enough. Harrison set the phone down, staring at the computer screen where his bypass duct design rotated slowly in three-dimensional rendering. Madison's voice cut through his thoughts, quiet but carrying the fierce determination that reminded him so much of Jennifer. "We're going to fight them, right? We can't let her just steal your work." The question deserved better answer than Harrison had. He'd spent 20 years in the Air Force following orders, trusting chain of command, believing that institutional processes would deliver justice if you did your job correctly and reported problems through proper channels. Then he'd spent another 15 years at Brooks Aviation, or rather, maintaining the Brooks Aviation fiction while actually running Drake Aerospace Defense, learning that corporations protected themselves first and individuals a distant second. That innovation got credited to companies rather than inventors. That loyalty flowed upward but rarely returned in kind. But this wasn't about military justice or corporate politics. This was personal theft by someone he'd invited into his home, his family, his bed. Someone who'd calculated his vulnerability with the precision of an engineer optimizing design parameters, extracted what she needed, and discarded him when the value proposition changed. He turned to face Madison, seeing Jennifer's determination in their daughter's expression, feeling the particular weight of fatherhood that came from knowing your decisions would shape the life of someone who depended on you completely. "Yeah, kid, we're going to fight, even if it costs everything. We're going to make sure people know I developed that engine design, that Sterling stole it, that you can't just take someone's work and claim it as your own." The stew had started to bubble, rich smell of browning meat and vegetables filling the kitchen. Harrison moved back to tend it, adjusting heat and seasoning through muscle memory, while his mind churned through legal strategies and evidence compilation. Madison settled at the table with her iPad, already drafting the email to Carson with scanned documents and technical specifications. They ate dinner in relative quiet, the meal Harrison had prepared tasting like cardboard despite proper cooking technique. Madison pushed food around her plate, her usual teenage appetite missing. The empty chair where Victoria had sat for 5 years dominated the space like ghost at the table, a reminder of absence that cut deeper than the physical loss of one person from their household. After dinner, Harrison retreated to his office while Madison tackled homework. He spent 3 hours compiling documentation, building chronological timeline of his engine development work, cross-referencing his files with email records and project notes. The evidence was overwhelming. He developed every aspect of the bypass duct design, documented each iteration, kept meticulous records that proved independent invention. Sterling's announcement had come 2 weeks ago. They'd claimed the EcoJet represented 3 years of internal research and development, a timeline that would put their development starting a year before Harrison's initial concept, if their story held up. But Harrison had his timestamps, his patent filing, his witness testimony from Brooks Aviation colleagues who discussed the project with him over the past 2 years. Any competent engineer reviewing both designs would see they were identical beyond the threshold of independent invention. His phone buzzed against the desk, unknown number lighting the screen. Harrison almost declined the call, finger hovering over the red reject button. Then curiosity overrode caution. He answered without speaking, waiting. Victoria's voice came through, familiar in ways that made his chest ache despite everything that had happened in the 72 hours since he'd watched her kiss Ryan Garrett. "Harrison, it's Victoria. Please don't hang up. I know you've discovered who I really am. We need to talk. Not for my sake, for yours. There are things about this situation you don't understand. Things that will make sense if you'll give me a chance to explain. The audacity of the request made anger flare hot and sudden, replacing the grief that had dominated his emotional landscape for 3 days. His grip tightened on the phone, knuckles white against the black case. Explain. You want to explain how you lied about your entire identity for 5 years? How you stole my engineering work? How you married me under false pretenses and destroyed my ability to trust anyone ever again? A pause stretched across the connection, long enough that Harrison wondered if she'd hung up or if the cell signal had dropped. Then her voice came back steadier, carrying something that might have been actual emotion instead of the calculated performance that had defined their marriage. I deserve your anger. I deserve worse than your anger. But if you file lawsuit against Sterling, Marcus will destroy you. He's already prepared countermeasures, fabricated consulting contracts that make it look like you stole from us, forged signatures that are good enough to pass initial scrutiny, witness testimony from people he's paying to lie. You'll be bankrupt and potentially facing criminal charges before you get past the first hearing. The words landed like foreign object damage, unexpected and devastating. Harrison's free hand gripped the desk edge, his engineer's mind already running through the implications, while his emotional core processed the threat. Or was it a warning? The distinction mattered, determined whether Victoria was enemy or something more complicated. You're threatening me. Victoria's exhale carried through the phone connection, exhaustion and something else Harrison couldn't quite identify, coloring her response. I'm warning you. Marcus found out about us 6 months ago. He's been planning this ever since. How to extract your research, how to neutralize you as threat, how to use your relationship with me to discredit anything you might claim. The consulting contracts are backdated 3 years. He has your signature samples from restaurant receipts, bank checks, documents you signed at our house when I asked you to witness forms. The forgeries are good enough that you'll need handwriting experts and document examiners to prove they're fake. And that takes time and money you don't have. Harrison's stomach dropped as implications cascaded through his understanding, like compressor stall propagating through turbine stages. He'd signed hundreds of documents over 5 years of marriage, lease agreements, mortgage refinancing that he'd allowed to proceed even though he owned the house outright through a shell corporation. Tax returns filed jointly under his consultant identity, insurance policies. Victoria would have had access to all of them, could have provided signature samples to skilled forger. Creating backdated contracts that appeared legitimate would be trivial for someone with Sterling Aerospace's resources. Resources Harrison actually exceeded by several orders of magnitude, though Victoria didn't know that crucial detail. His voice came out hollow, stripped of the anger that had fueled his initial response. Why are you telling me this? The answer took long enough that Harrison wondered if she'd hung up. Then Victoria's voice returned, quieter than before, carrying an edge of desperation that sounded genuine in ways her previous explanations hadn't. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal, what I felt for you was real. I didn't come to Connecticut to spy on you, Harrison. I came because I was tired of being Victoria Sterling, tired of the corporate warfare and family pressure, an artificial world where people only valued me for my last name and my position. I wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for myself, not for what I represented. The explanation sounded too convenient, too calculated to absolve her of responsibility for systematic deception spanning half a decade. Harrison's grip on the phone tightened until plastic creaked under pressure. So you lied about your entire identity and stole my work? That's an interesting definition of love. Victoria's voice cracked, the first genuine emotion he'd heard from her since she'd walked into the hangar conference room 3 days ago with divorce papers and manufactured indifference. I didn't steal your work. Marcus did. 6 months ago, he found out I'd been living in Connecticut, confronted me about abandoning Sterling. He saw your workshop, demanded I extract your research. I refused. threatened to quit. That's when he started planning the hack. 3 months ago, he discovered you were actually a billionaire. That changed everything. He realized he didn't need my cooperation. He could just steal the designs and destroy you publicly. I didn't know he'd access my laptop until 2 days ago when I found Connor Wallace's penetration reports in Marcus's secure files. Found your blueprints in my personal files where I'd saved them because I was proud of what you were developing. He took them without my knowledge, launched the EcoJet program to force me back into the company by giving me no choice but to defend Sterling's reputation or admit I'd been feeding information to a competitor. Harrison's analytical mind wanted to dissect the statement, find the logical flaws, identify the manipulation. But another part of him, the part that had loved the woman he'd known as Victoria Reeves, wanted desperately to believe her. That tension between engineering logic and emotional need had defined his relationship with Victoria from the beginning. He'd ignored red flags because he'd wanted the fairy tale, the second chance at partnership after Jennifer's death. He'd constructed an entire false identity to test whether someone could love him for himself rather than his wealth, then failed to notice when the person he was testing had constructed an equally elaborate fiction. He forced his voice to stay level, analytical, stripping emotion from the equation to focus on actionable intelligence. If that's true, if you really didn't intend to steal my work, then help me prove it. Testify against Marcus. Provide evidence of his theft. Give me the ammunition I need to fight Sterling in court. The silence stretched longer this time, painful in its implications. When Victoria spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone caught between impossible choices, forced to choose between competing loyalties that couldn't be reconciled. If I testify against Marcus, he'll destroy Sterling Aerospace. The company has been operating on the edge of solvency for 2 years. The EcoJet program represents our last chance to secure enough contracts to stay competitive with the major manufacturers. If we lose that technology, if the lawsuit delays production or forces us to pay royalties, we'll be bankrupt within 18 months. 3,000 employees will lose their jobs. My father spent his life building that company. I can't be the one who destroys it. Harrison stood, his chair rolling backward and hitting the wall, his voice rising despite efforts at control. The phone pressed hard against his ear. Every word from Victoria, another betrayal, layered on top of the original deception. But you can watch Marcus destroy me? Watch him use forged documents and false testimony to paint me as a thief while he steals my work? That's where your moral line lands? Victoria's answer came through tears now, her professional composure finally shattering into something raw and undefended. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. I love you, Harrison. I love Madison. The 5 years I spent in your house were the happiest of my life. And I threw them away because I'm a coward who couldn't choose between the life I wanted and the responsibilities I was born into. I'm trying to protect you the only way I can, by warning you that fighting Marcus will destroy everything you built. The call ended before Harrison could respond, Victoria hanging up and leaving him standing in his office, with rage and grief and confusion battling for dominance. His phone showed 9:47 p.m., the evening consumed by documentation and legal planning and revelations that kept rewriting his understanding of the past 5 years. A soft knock came from the office door. Madison stood in the doorway, wearing pajamas printed with equations and engineering diagrams, a gift from last Christmas when their family had still been intact. Her eyes were red, evidence she'd been crying while doing homework, processing her own grief over Victoria's departure and the revealed deception. I heard you yelling. Was that Victoria? Harrison moved to his daughter, pulling her into a hug that felt like the only solid thing in a world gone liquid and unstable. At 16, she was almost as tall as him now, no longer the little girl who'd needed him to check under beds for monsters. Yeah, she called to warn me that Sterling is going to fight dirty if I sue them. Forged documents, false testimony, everything they need to destroy my credibility and claim I stole from them instead of the other way around. Madison pulled back enough to look up at him, her expression fierce despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "What are you going to do?" The question everyone kept asking, the decision Harrison kept deferring while gathering information and building evidence. The honest answer required numbers he didn't want to say out loud, acknowledgement of stakes that extended beyond his personal grievance into Madison's future and financial security. "I don't know yet. If I fight them and lose, we could lose everything. The house, my job, your college fund. But if I don't fight them, they get away with stealing 2 years of my work. And I prove to the world that you can exploit people without consequences as long as you have enough money and power." Madison's arms tightened around him, her voice muffled against his chest, but carrying absolute conviction. "We'll figure it out, Dad. We always do. You and me, we're a team. We survived Mom dying. We survived you working 2 jobs to pay medical bills. We survived everything life threw at us. We'll survive this too." The confidence in her voice, the certainty that they would find a way through this crisis, broke something in Harrison's chest that had been holding together through sheer force of will. He'd tried so hard to protect her from adult problems, to shield her from the ugliness of financial struggle and corporate warfare and romantic betrayal. But Madison had grown up watching him handle impossible situations through persistence and careful planning. She'd learned resilience by example, absorbed the lesson that problems got solved through systematic analysis and refusal to quit even when the odds looked insurmountable. They stood together in the office doorway, father and daughter against a world that had suddenly revealed itself as more hostile than either had imagined. Outside, October darkness had settled over Connecticut, the suburban quiet broken only by distant traffic and the sound of a neighbor's dog barking. Inside Harrison Drake's modest 3-bedroom house, battle plans formed and reformed. Legal strategies evolved and discarded, while 2 people who'd lost too much already prepared to risk what remained on the principle that theft deserved consequences regardless of the thief's resources. Harrison's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Mitchell Carson. The message loaded on screen, words that felt like validation and threat combined. "Reviewed the documents Madison sent. You have a strong case, but Victoria's warning about countermeasures is credible. We need to talk strategy tomorrow. This is going to get ugly before it gets better." The message confirmed that Harrison's evidence would hold up, while warning that Sterling's resources could still crush him through attrition and manufactured evidence. David versus Goliath indeed, except this Goliath had lawyers instead of armor, and used courtroom procedure instead of physical combat. And David was secretly a giant himself, wearing beggar's clothes while commanding resources that dwarfed Sterling Aerospace's entire market capitalization. Madison had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her breathing steady and peaceful in the way that only came to teenagers who could shut down their anxieties through sheer exhaustion. Harrison carried her to her bedroom, tucking her in like he'd done when she was 6 and afraid of the dark after Jennifer's death. She'd grown up too fast, forced into premature maturity by loss and circumstance. Now she was facing another adult crisis, another situation where the world proved itself less fair than children deserved. In his own bedroom, Harrison stripped off clothes and crawled under covers that still smelled faintly of Victoria's perfume, that expensive scent he'd never questioned. The empty space beside him felt enormous, a physical manifestation of betrayal that had gutted his ability to trust. He'd let her in completely, shared his work and his home and his daughter, believed the performance because he'd wanted so desperately for it to be real. Sleep came in fragments between analyzing legal strategies and replaying 5 years of memories through the lens of deception. Every conversation about his work now looked like intelligence gathering. Every interested question about his engineering challenges became evidence of systematic extraction. Even moments that had felt intimate and genuine, late-night conversations about dreams and fears, quiet mornings drinking coffee before work, were tainted by the knowledge that Victoria had been playing a role the entire time. Morning arrived too early, sunlight filtering through curtains and Harrison's phone alarm dragging him into consciousness. His body ached like he'd worked a double shift wrestling engine components, muscles tight from stress and insufficient sleep. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, evidence that Madison had activated the programmable pot before heading to school. Harrison moved through his morning routine mechanically. Shower, shave, coveralls over jeans and t-shirt, work boots that had served him for 3 years of maintaining this fiction. The face in the bathroom mirror looked older than 52, gray hair more prominent, lines deeper around eyes that held exhaustion and determination in equal measure. The drive to Brooks Aviation took him past familiar landmarks that now carried different weight. The diner where he'd first met Victoria, the church where they'd gotten married, the park where they'd walked with Madison on summer evenings. Each location held memories that now felt like carefully constructed lies, performances designed to make him lower his guard and share his vulnerabilities. At the hangar, morning shift was already underway. Mechanics and engineers moving through pre-flight checks and maintenance procedures with choreographed efficiency that came from repetition and training. Harrison's team greeted him with casual acknowledgement of co-workers who'd worked together long enough to read moods and know when to leave someone alone. Word had spread about his divorce. Small companies didn't keep secrets well, but nobody mentioned it directly. Rich Walsh found Harrison in the break room pouring coffee into a travel mug, the early morning ritual that preceded daily production meetings. Walsh had been Harrison's friend for 30 years, their Air Force careers overlapping before they'd both ended up at Brooks Aviation through different paths. Or rather, before Harrison had established his consultant identity here, while Walsh had genuinely transitioned to civilian aerospace work. At 48, Walsh carried comfortable weight of someone who'd given up fighting age, his hair thinning and his gut expanding despite his wife's efforts at healthy meal planning. Walsh's voice carried concern beneath the casual tone. "Heard you signed the papers yesterday. You doing okay?" Harrison considered several responses before settling on honesty, or at least the version of honesty available to someone maintaining elaborate cover identity. "Victoria wasn't who I thought she was. Turns out she's Victoria Sterling, Director of Research and Development at Sterling Aerospace." The coffee cup in Walsh's hand stopped halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening with genuine shock. "Sterling? As in our primary competitor? The company that's been undercutting our bids and poaching our engineers?" Harrison nodded, watching understanding dawn across Walsh's face as implications registered. "Same one, and she stole my bypass duct design. The EcoJet engine they announced 2 weeks ago. That's my work, specifications and all. I have timestamps and patent filings proving I developed it first." Walsh set his coffee down carefully, his expression cycling through shock and anger before landing on grim calculation that came from decades in the aerospace industry. "Harrison, if that's true, if you can prove they stole your design, you're sitting on a major intellectual property case. But Sterling has resources that could drag you through court until you're bankrupt. What are you planning to do?" The question everyone kept asking, the decision that would determine the trajectory of his life and Madison's future. Harrison could reveal his true identity, bring Drake Aerospace Defense's resources to bear, crush Sterling with overwhelming legal force. Or he could maintain the fiction, fight as struggling consultant against aerospace giant, let the conflict play out in ways that might expose truths he'd spent 5 years concealing. "Fight them. Carson is reviewing my documentation now, but the evidence is solid. I developed that engine design on my own time, using my own resources. Sterling took it and claimed it as theirs. That's theft, and I'm not letting them get away with it just because they're bigger and richer." Walsh's hand came down on Harrison's shoulder, the weight familiar from decades of friendship. "You need help, money, testimony, technical review, you ask. Your family, Harrison. We don't let family fight alone." The support felt like oxygen after drowning. validation that Harrison's decision to fight wasn't insane despite the odds. He'd spent too long isolated, first by Jennifer's death, and then by his relationship with Victoria, who'd systematically separated him from support networks and community ties under the guise of wanting private time together. Having someone stand with him, even just in principle, made the impossible odds feel slightly less crushing. The production meeting ran long, budget discussions and timeline pressures consuming the morning. Harrison's mind drifted, analyzing legal strategies and evidence compilation, while his body went through motions of engineering review and status updates. By lunch, he'd received 3 calls from Carson's office, paralegal staff requesting additional documentation and technical specifications to build the case file. Afternoon brought unexpected interruption. A knock on Harrison's office door, followed by Ryan Garrett's arrival. The test pilot looked exactly like recruitment posters for military aviation, tall and confident, with a particular swagger that came from flying experimental aircraft at the edge of their performance envelopes. Seeing him triggered visceral anger, memory of finding him with Victoria still fresh enough to make Harrison's hands clench involuntarily. Garrett's voice carried something that might have been respect or calculation. Harrison couldn't determine which. "Hey, got a minute to talk?" Harrison considered throwing him out, letting years of Air Force discipline override the civilian impulse toward violence. Instead, he gestured to the visitor chair, keeping his desk between them as barrier. "Make it quick. I've got work." Garrett sat, his movements carrying economy of someone comfortable in his body, trained through thousands of hours in high-performance aircraft. "I heard about the divorce and about Victoria's real identity. I need you to know, I didn't know who she was when I crossed that line. She told me she was separated, that you two had been over for months. I'm not making excuses, but I wouldn't have touched another man's wife if I'd known the truth." The explanation sounded genuine, carried weight that suggested Garrett had his own code about loyalty and boundaries. But it didn't erase the image burned into Harrison's memory, didn't undo the betrayal that had triggered everything else. "Why are you telling me this?" Garrett leaned forward, his expression shifting to serious intensity. "Because I'm testifying in your lawsuit. Victoria called me this morning, tried to convince me to stay quiet about what I know. But I've seen your engine design, Harrison. I flew test protocol on Brooks simulator using your specifications. That bypass duct technology is revolutionary, could change the entire regional aviation industry. Sterling didn't develop that, you did, and I'm not staying silent while they steal your work." The statement landed like unexpected reinforcement arriving on battlefield Harrison had thought he'd fight alone. Garrett's testimony would carry weight. Military test pilot with 15 years of experience, no financial stake in the outcome, professional reputation that made him credible witness. "What exactly do you know about Sterling's version?" Garrett's jaw tightened, a tell Harrison recognized from military briefings when pilots were about to deliver bad news. 2 weeks ago, Sterling brought me in as outside consultant for their EcoJet test program. They wanted independent validation before announcing to investors. I ran the engine through full performance envelope on their simulator. He paused, and Harrison saw something flash across his face. Not just professional concern, but genuine fear. The thermal management is catastrophically flawed. At cruise power settings, exhaust gas temperature climbs into red zone within 90 seconds. The cooling passages that made your design work, they're not there. Sterling modified the geometry trying to differentiate from your patent, but they destroyed the thermal balance. That engine will grenade itself at altitude. Harrison felt ice settle in his stomach. His design had included specific cooling air passages routed through the high-pressure turbine section, carefully optimized through hundreds of CFD iterations to maintain blade temperatures within material limits. If Sterling had removed those passages, "What did you tell them?" Garrett's expression turned grim. "I told Marcus Sterling his engine was a death trap, recommended immediate redesign before any production commitments. He thanked me for my input, paid my consulting fee, and announced the EcoJet program 2 days later with full production schedule. The implications cascaded through Harrison's understanding. Sterling wasn't just stealing intellectual property, they were preparing to manufacture and sell defective engines that could fail catastrophically in flight. Commercial aircraft with hundreds of passengers aboard, powered by turbines that would overheat and disintegrate. You have documentation of this? Garrett pulled USB drive from his jacket pocket, set it on Harrison's desk. Simulator logs, thermal analysis, my written report to Marcus, his email response dismissing my concerns. Everything you need to prove Sterling knows their engine is dangerous, and they're proceeding anyway. Harrison picked up the drive, its small weight carrying enormous implications. This wasn't just about his stolen design anymore. This was about preventing potential mass casualties, about stopping a company willing to risk lives for profit. Why help me? You don't owe me anything. Garrett cut him off with a sharp gesture. After I kissed your wife, you mean? That's exactly why I'm helping. I was Victoria's tool, whether she knew it or not. Marcus sent her to distract you, compromise you, make you vulnerable. That kiss you saw? It was her telling me to back off, not the beginning of an affair. She was trying to protect you even while her brother was stealing from you. The revelation didn't erase the pain of that moment, but it shifted Harrison's understanding of Victoria's role. Not willing participant in seduction, but woman caught between competing loyalties, trying to serve her family while protecting the man she claimed to love. You're certain about the engine flaw? Garrett's voice carried absolute conviction. I'm a test pilot, Harrison. I've flown hundreds of aircraft at their limits. I know what catastrophic failure looks like. Sterling's EcoJet is a disaster waiting to happen, and I'll testify to that under oath, in front of anyone who'll listen. After Garrett left, Harrison sat alone in his office, turning the USB drive over in his hands. The evidence it contained transformed his case from civil dispute over intellectual property into safety crisis that could involve federal regulators. The FAA didn't take kindly to companies knowingly manufacturing dangerous aircraft engines. He plugged the drive into his computer, opened the files. Garrett's simulator logs showed exactly what he'd described: temperature spikes, inadequate cooling, thermal runaway that would lead to blade failure. The written report was professionally devastating, laying out technical analysis that no competent engineer could dismiss. And Marcus Sterling's email response was damning in its brevity. Thank you for your assessment. Sterling engineering team believes these issues are manageable within production tolerances. Your services are no longer required. Harrison forwarded everything to Carson with a message. New evidence. Sterling knows their engine is defective. They're proceeding with production anyway. This changes everything. His phone rang within 5 minutes. Carson's voice carried urgency Harrison had rarely heard from the normally unflappable attorney. Harrison, this is no longer just intellectual property theft. If Sterling is knowingly manufacturing defective engines, we're talking federal safety violations, potential criminal liability. The FAA will have to investigate. This could destroy the company. The weight of that statement settled over Harrison like heavy blanket. 3,000 jobs, Victoria's father's legacy, an aerospace company with 60 years of history, all of it potentially ending because Marcus Sterling had chosen corporate espionage and reckless endangerment over honest business practices. What's our next move? Carson was quiet for a moment, and Harrison could hear papers rustling in the background. I need to consult with aviation safety specialists. This is beyond standard patent litigation. But Harrison, once we file this with the FAA, there's no taking it back. Sterling will know it came from you. They'll come after you with everything they have. Harrison thought about Madison, about the house they lived in, about the life he'd built around his consultant identity. Then he thought about commercial aircraft falling from the sky because turbine blades shattered at 30,000 feet. File it. People's lives are worth more than protecting my cover story. The call ended with Carson promising to contact FAA investigators and prepare a formal safety complaint. Harrison sat in his office, watching through the window as mechanics worked on the Bombardier outside. Honest work by honest people, maintaining aircraft to standards that kept passengers safe. Everything Sterling Aerospace should have been doing instead of cutting corners and stealing technology. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. In person. Tomorrow, noon, the diner where we met. Please. V." Harrison stared at the message, thumb hovering over delete button. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, to maintain distance from the woman who'd systematically deceived him. But another part of him, the part that had loved Victoria Reeves, or thought he had, needed to hear what she had to say. Needed to understand whether any part of their relationship had been real, or if it had all been elaborate performance in service of corporate espionage. He typed a response. "I'll be there, but this doesn't change anything." The reply came immediately. "I know. Thank you." That night, Harrison sat at his home computer long after Madison had gone to bed, reviewing every interaction with Victoria through the lens of his new understanding. The I-95 breakdown that had seemed like chance encounter, had she staged it? The 8 months of dating before his proposal, had every moment been calculated to build trust? The wedding, the years of marriage, the integration into his and Madison's lives. Where did manipulation end and genuine feeling begin? He pulled up Sterling Aerospace's website, navigated to the executive team page, studied Victoria's professional biography. 15 years in aerospace engineering, senior positions at one of the industry's most prestigious companies. Daughter of the founder, sister to the CEO. She'd had everything: wealth, status, career success. What had she needed from a supposed struggling consultant that she couldn't get from her real life? His phone rang. Madison's name on the screen despite the late hour. "Dad, I can't sleep. Can we talk?" He found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with laptop open, surrounded by printouts of technical specifications and legal documents. "I've been researching Sterling Aerospace's financial situation. They're in worse shape than Victoria told you. Stock price down 60% in 2 years. Quarterly losses accelerating. Debt covenants they're close to violating. The EcoJet program isn't just important to them. It's literally the only thing standing between Sterling and bankruptcy." Harrison sat across from her, seeing Jennifer's analytical mind at work in their daughter's late-night research project. "That doesn't excuse what they did." Madison's eyes met his, carrying wisdom beyond her 16 years. "I'm not saying it excuses it. I'm saying it explains it. Marcus Sterling is desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. And Victoria, Dad, what if she really did fall in love with you? What if she was trying to serve her family and her heart, and she got caught in between?" The question cut deeper than Harrison wanted to admit. Because he'd done the same thing, hadn't he? Constructed false identity to test whether someone could love him for himself rather than his wealth. Used Victoria as unknowing subject in an experiment about authenticity and motivation. They've both been living lies, both been testing each other, both been searching for something genuine in relationship built on foundations of deception. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe some things are too broken to fix." Madison reached across the table, took his hand. "Or maybe broken things can be repaired if both people are willing to do the work. You taught me that. Every engine that comes through that hangar, you don't throw it away when something breaks. You diagnose the problem, replace the damaged parts, test it until it works again. Why should relationships be different?" Harrison smiled despite the pain in his chest. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." They sat together in the quiet kitchen, father and daughter, planning strategy for the battles ahead. Madison had already prepared a comprehensive timeline of Harrison's engine development, cross-referenced with Sterling's announcement, highlighting the impossibility of their claimed 3-year development period. She'd compiled witness lists, identified experts who could testify to the design's originality, even drafted initial complaints for both patent infringement and safety violations. "You've been busy," she shrugged, teenager's attempt at casual dismissal of obvious effort. "You're my dad. Someone stole your work. I'm not letting them get away with it." Harrison pulled her into a hug, grateful beyond words for this fierce, brilliant daughter who'd inherited the best of both her parents and somehow avoided their worst flaws. "Tomorrow I'm meeting Victoria at the diner. Do you want to come?" Madison considered the question seriously before shaking her head. "This is between you two. You need to hear what she has to say without me there complicating things." "But Dad, whatever she tells you, remember, people can tell the truth about their feelings while lying about everything else. The two things aren't mutually exclusive." The wisdom of that observation stayed with Harrison through another night of fractured sleep and into the morning as he drove toward the diner, where this entire situation had begun 5 years ago. The Route 1 diner looked exactly as it had then: aging chrome exterior, neon sign advertising all-day breakfast, parking lot that needed repaving. Harrison had bought this property 3 years ago through one of Drake Aerospace Defense's shell corporations after learning it was slated for demolition, preserving it because of sentimental attachment to the place where he'd met Victoria. Another irony to add to the growing collection. Victoria sat in the same booth where they'd had their first conversation, looking smaller somehow than she had in the hangar conference room. She wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of designer suit, her hair pulled back in ponytail that reminded Harrison painfully of that first meeting. No jewelry except a watch he didn't recognize, not the expensive pieces she'd worn during their marriage, but something simple and functional. She looked up as he approached, and Harrison saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not the calculated expression of someone playing a role, but raw vulnerability of someone who knew they destroyed something precious and had no idea how to repair the damage. He slid into the booth across from her, maintaining physical distance even as every cell in his body remembered 5 years of closeness. "You wanted to talk. I'm listening." Victoria's hands wrapped around a coffee cup, knuckles white with tension. "I know you've discovered everything, who I really am, what Marcus did, the lawsuit you're planning, and I know you found out about the engine flaw." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "How do you know about that?" "Ryan called me after he gave you the USB drive. He thought I should know what Marcus has done, what he's willing to risk." That's when I started digging, really digging, not just the surface files Marcus let me see. She took a shaky breath, and Harrison saw tears forming. "I didn't know, Harrison, about the thermal problems, about Marcus dismissing Ryan's report, about the decision to proceed with production despite safety concerns. He kept me locked out of the actual EcoJet program, had me working on unrelated R&D projects. 2 days ago, after Ryan's call, I used my director credentials to crack Marcus's secure files. Found everything. The hack logs showing Connor Wallace accessed my laptop, the forged consulting contracts with your signature, internal memos about suppressing test failures. All of it." She pulled her own USB drive from her purse, set it on the table between them. "This has everything. Marcus's emails ordering the theft of your design, Connor Wallace's reports on hacking your systems, internal memos about the thermal management problems, documentation showing Marcus knew the engine was dangerous and ordered production anyway, financial projections showing Sterling will go bankrupt if the EcoJet fails. Everything you need to destroy him and the company." Harrison stared at the drive without touching it, a small piece of plastic that represented Victoria's final choice between family loyalty and something else. Truth, perhaps, or redemption, or just the desperate hope that honesty might salvage something from the wreckage of their relationship. Why now? Why not 3 months ago when Marcus first stole my design? Why not 5 years ago when he sent you to spy on me? Victoria's tears fell freely now, her voice breaking. "Because 3 months ago, I was still trying to save my family's company and my relationship with you. I thought I could somehow manage both. Keep Marcus from destroying you while protecting Sterling from bankruptcy. I was a coward, trying to serve two masters, failing both. She met his eyes directly, holding contact despite obvious pain. And 5 years ago? Harrison, Marcus didn't send me to spy on you. He didn't even know you existed 5 years ago. I came to Connecticut because I was burned out from corporate politics, exhausted from being Victoria Sterling, suffocating under the weight of family expectations. I wanted to disappear for a while, be someone else, someone normal. The Lexus breakdown was real. Meeting you was real. Falling in love with you was real. Harrison wanted to believe her, wanted it so badly his chest ached. But 5 years of deception stood between them, insurmountable wall of broken trust. When did it change? When did you become Marcus's spy? Victoria's face crumpled, years of careful composure shattering. 6 months into our marriage, Marcus found out I'd been living in Connecticut, tracked me down, confronted me about abandoning the family business. He saw your workshop, saw the engine designs, realized you were working on technology Sterling desperately needed. That's when he demanded I extract your research. And you agreed. I refused. I told him I'd quit Sterling before I'd betray you. So he threatened to destroy you, fabricate evidence that you'd stolen from Sterling, ruin your career, make sure you'd never work in aerospace again. He said if I really loved you, I'd cooperate to protect you from worse outcomes. She laughed bitterly. I was stupid enough to believe him, stupid enough to think I could feed Marcus just enough information to satisfy him while protecting your real breakthroughs. I didn't know he'd hacked my laptop until after the divorce, when Connor Wallace bragged about it to someone and it got back to me. Harrison processed the timeline, fitting pieces together. If Victoria was telling the truth, she'd been caught in her brother's scheme, manipulated into believing cooperation would protect Harrison. But she'd still lied about her identity for years before Marcus's involvement, still chosen to maintain the deception rather than come clean. You had 4 years before Marcus got involved. 4 years when you could have told me the truth about who you were. Why didn't you? Victoria's answer came quiet, laden with regret. Because I'd fallen in love with the way you looked at me, like I was just Victoria, not Victoria Sterling the heiress, not Victoria Sterling the executive, just me. And I knew if I told you the truth, that would change. You'd see my last name and my position, and you'd wonder if I loved you, or if I was slumming with blue-collar engineer as rebellion against my family. The irony of it struck Harrison like physical blow. She'd hidden her wealth and status for exactly the same reason he'd hidden his. Fear that revealing the truth would contaminate the relationship, make it impossible to know whether love was genuine or motivated by money and power. They'd both been running elaborate experiments in authenticity, both been testing whether they could be loved for themselves, both been lying to each other in pursuit of truth. And in the process, they destroyed any possibility of the genuine connection they've been seeking. Harrison pulled off his watch, the cheap Seiko he wore for cover, and set it on the table. Then he rolled up his sleeve, revealing the Patek Philippe Nautilus underneath, $500,000 of Swiss craftsmanship he'd kept hidden for 5 years. Victoria stared, her face cycling through confusion, shock, then something that might have been hysterical laughter trying to escape. My name is Harrison Drake. I'm CEO of Drake Aerospace Defense, net worth $8.2 billion. I've been living as struggling consultant for 5 years because I wanted to know if someone could love me for who I am instead of what I'm worth. Turns out I was testing you the same way you were testing me, and we both failed the exam. The explanation sounded too convenient, too calculated to absolve her of responsibility for systematic deception spanning half a decade. Harrison's grip on the phone tightened until plastic creaked under pressure. So you lied about your entire identity and stole my work. That's an interesting definition of love. Victoria's voice cracked, the first genuine emotion he'd heard from her since she'd walked into the hangar conference room 3 days ago with divorce papers and manufactured indifference. "I didn't steal your work. Marcus did. 6 months into our marriage, he found out I'd been living in Connecticut, tracked me down, confronted me about abandoning the family business. He saw your workshop, saw the engine designs, realized you were working on technology Sterling desperately needed. That's when he demanded I extract your research." Harrison's analytical mind cataloged the timeline, fitting pieces into sequence that finally made sense. "And you agreed." "I refused. I told him I'd quit Sterling before I'd betray you. So he threatened to destroy you, fabricate evidence that you'd stolen from Sterling, ruin your career, make sure you'd never work in aerospace again. He said if I really loved you, I'd cooperate to protect you from worse outcomes." She laughed bitterly, the sound carrying years of self-recrimination. "I was stupid enough to believe him. Stupid enough to think I could feed Marcus just enough information to satisfy him while protecting your real breakthroughs. I didn't know he'd hacked my laptop until 2 days ago, when I accessed his secure files and found Connor Wallace's penetration reports. Marcus got everything without me giving him anything." Harrison processed this new understanding, recalibrating his assessment of Victoria's culpability. Still guilty of the original deception about her identity, but perhaps not the willing accomplice to theft he'd imagined. "When did Marcus find out I'm not actually a struggling consultant?" Victoria's answer came quiet, laden with implications. "3 months ago. The provisional patent you filed went through Drake Aerospace Defense's legal team. Marcus hired private investigator to track the filing. Investigator connected you to the company, discovered your real net worth. That's when everything changed for him. When he realized he wasn't just stealing from talented engineer, but from billionaire CEO who could destroy Sterling with a phone call. The strategic sophistication was impressive and terrifying. Marcus had been playing multi-dimensional chess, while Harrison thought they were competing in straightforward patent litigation. Why didn't he use it? Why maintain the pretense? Because his strategy depends on you revealing yourself. He's got media contacts ready to run stories about eccentric billionaire who deceived his wife, lived double life, psychologically tortured woman with his deception. He's planning to flip the narrative, make you the villain and Sterling the victim. When you file FAA complaint, he'll release everything, make it look like you're using regulatory agencies to wage personal vendetta because your fake marriage fell apart. Harrison's phone buzzed. Text from Madison. "Dad, turn on CNBC. Sterling Aerospace News." He pulled up the business channel. Breaking news banner scrolled across bottom. Sterling Aerospace announces major partnership with Pacific Airways. $800 million engine order. Victoria grabbed his phone, enlarging the video. Marcus Sterling stood at podium in Sterling headquarters, looking confident and polished. Behind him, Pacific Airways CEO signed documents while cameras flashed. Harrison's jaw tightened. The timing felt calculated, Marcus announcing this now, while Victoria and Harrison were presumably dealing with divorce fallout, maximizing the pressure. Or maybe just coincidence. Either way, it changed everything. Marcus's voice carried through the speaker, smooth and authoritative. "This partnership represents validation of Sterling Aerospace's engineering excellence. The EcoJet engine will power Pacific Airways' new regional fleet, delivering unprecedented efficiency and performance. This contract secures Sterling's future." Victoria's face had gone pale, her hand trembling as she set the phone down. $800 million. 80 engines for Pacific Airways' entire regional fleet. First deliveries in 6 months, before any FAA investigation could possibly conclude. Harrison, he's racing to get defective engines into service before anyone can stop him. Once they're flying passenger routes, grounding them becomes political nightmare. He's betting on regulatory inertia. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything Harrison had anticipated. This wasn't about corporate espionage or stolen intellectual property anymore. Marcus Sterling had just committed to manufacturing and delivering engines that Ryan Garrett's testing had proven were catastrophically flawed, gambling that bureaucratic momentum would protect him once the engines were in active service. I need to contact the FAA immediately. This can't wait for civil litigation. Victoria grabbed his wrist, urgency replacing her earlier shock. Wait, if you file now, Marcus will claim Ryan is unreliable witness, that the test was flawed, that outside consultant can't understand Sterling's proprietary modifications. Without inside evidence from someone Marcus can't discredit, he'll delay investigation for months while engines go into production. What are you suggesting? Let me go to tonight's family meeting. Let me record Marcus discussing the thermal problems, admitting he knows about the safety issues. Get him on record prioritizing profit over passenger lives. Then when you file with the FAA, you'll have Sterling's own CEO confessing to knowing endangerment. Harrison studied her face, seeing determination that reminded him of Madison's fierce commitment to fighting injustice. That's asking you to wear a wire into meeting with people who've known you your entire life. If they find it, if Marcus suspects, then I'll deal with consequences. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about preventing mass casualties because my brother is too arrogant and desperate to admit his theft backfired. She pulled a small device from her purse, professional-grade digital recorder. I bought this 2 days ago after I found Marcus's files. I've been planning this since I realized how far he'd gone. If you do this, there's no going back. Your family will disown you. Sterling Society connections, your inheritance, probably your career in aerospace, all of it gone. Victoria's smile carried sad acceptance. I already lost what mattered when I lost you in Madison. Everything else is just noise. Harrison's phone rang. Mitchell Carson. I need to take this. He stepped outside, answering while watching Victoria through the window as she collected herself, preparing for the performance she'd have to give. Carson's voice carried controlled urgency. Harrison, FBI contacted me. Special Agent Laura Brennan is investigating the computer intrusion based on evidence we provided. But she's asking questions about your identity. Wants to know why consultant has security systems sophisticated enough to detect and log professional hacking attempts. How do you want me to handle this? The question cut to the core of Harrison's dilemma. Maintaining his cover meant accepting limitations that might cost lives. Revealing his true identity meant exposing 5 years of deception to federal scrutiny. Tell her the truth, all of it. I'm done pretending. You're certain? Once FBI knows, it becomes part of investigative record, can't be undone. I'm certain. And Mitchell, prepare emergency filing with FAA. Safety complaint regarding Sterling EcoJet engine, alleging known thermal management defects being concealed from regulators. I'll have recorded evidence within 24 hours. He ended the call, returned to the booth where Victoria was reviewing notes on her phone. FBI is investigating the computer intrusion. They're going to know about my real identity within hours. Victoria looked up, relief crossing her face. Good, I'm tired of lies, both of ours. Harrison sat down, meeting her eyes directly. Before you do this, before you record your family, I need to know about Ryan Garrett. That kiss I saw. Was it what I thought? Victoria's face crumpled, shame coloring every word. No, Marcus sent Ryan to seduce me, told him I was unhappy in our marriage, available. Ryan believed him, made his move. That moment you walked in, I was telling him to back off, that I loved my husband and wouldn't betray you no matter what Marcus wanted. Harrison's chest tightened. He'd replayed that scene 1,000 times, each replay confirming his belief in Victoria's infidelity. Ryan told me the same thing. I didn't believe him. Why would you? I'd already lied about everything else. But Harrison, that was the one line I wouldn't cross. Marcus wanted me to sleep with Ryan, create leverage to control you. I refused. That refusal is why Marcus hacked my laptop instead, because I wouldn't be his honeypot. The revelations shifted something fundamental in Harrison's understanding. Not exoneration, but context that mattered. After tonight, after you get Marcus on record, what will you do? Where will you go? She considered the question, staring into her coffee. Leave Connecticut, probably. Leave aerospace entirely. Maybe teach high school physics or something simple and honest, where people value you for what you contribute, not who your father was. That's quite a fall from executive position. Maybe it's not falling. Maybe it's finally landing on solid ground. Harrison understood that better than she knew. The consultant role at Brooks Aviation had been his own attempt to land on solid ground, to reconnect with engineering work that felt real. If you're serious about becoming physics teacher, you'll have summers free. The small joke broke tension, pulled reluctant smile from Victoria. Summers free and pension plan that doesn't depend on stock options in failing aerospace companies. They exchanged practical details about evidence transfer and FBI coordination. Victoria would record everything, upload files to secure cloud storage Harrison controlled, then send confirmation text. If he didn't receive confirmation by 10 p.m., he'd assume something had gone wrong. As they prepared to leave, Victoria reached across the table, taking Harrison's hand. Whatever happens tonight, thank you for giving me chance to do the right thing. Harrison squeezed her hand, feeling the familiar shape of her fingers. You're braver than you think. Your father would be proud. She pulled back, wiping eyes. My father would be horrified that his children destroyed his company through greed and cowardice. But maybe he'd appreciate that one of us tried to salvage his reputation. Harrison watched her drive away, then sat in the booth longer, processing everything. His phone rang. Madison. I saw the news about Pacific Airways contract. Dad, this is bad. I know. Victoria's getting recorded evidence tonight. We're filing with FAA tomorrow regardless. Victoria's helping us? She's helping prevent mass casualties. Madison was quiet, then her voice came back thoughtful. Do you still love her? The question deserved honesty. I love who I thought she was. Whether that person exists, whether she can exist again, I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. Good, because she just texted me. Harrison's pulse quickened. What did she say? She apologized for lying, for hurting our family, for not being brave enough to choose us from the beginning. She said loving us was the only real thing in her fake life. Emotion clogged Harrison's throat. What did you tell her? That I don't hate her, that I'm angry and hurt, but I don't hate her, and that if she's serious about teaching physics, she should start by reviewing thermodynamics, because Stirling's engine design violates basic heat transfer principles. Despite everything, Harrison laughed. You're remarkable. I learned from the best. Now come home. We need to prepare for what happens when you reveal who you really are. At home, Madison had transformed the dining room into command center. Laptops and printouts covered the table. Comprehensive timeline of Harrison's engine development, evidence packages for FAA and FBI, even drafted press release explaining his dual identity. I figured you'd need this once the story breaks. Better to control narrative than let media speculate. They spent the evening reviewing evidence, coordinating with Mitchell Carson and Laura Brennan. Harrison's phone remained in his hand, checking obsessively for confirmation text. 9 p.m. passed, 9:30. At 9:45, Madison squeezed his shoulder. Give her time. Family confrontations don't follow convenient schedules. At 9:55, his phone buzzed. Text from Victoria. Got it. Everything we need and worse. Marcus confessed to ordering the theft, acknowledged the thermal problems, admitted he's proceeding with production knowing engines are unsafe. But there's something else you need to hear. Call me. Harrison dialed immediately. Victoria answered, voice tight with stress. Marcus knows who you are. He's known for 3 months. Harrison's world tilted. How is that possible? He hired private investigator after you filed provisional patent. Investigator tracked it back to Drake Aerospace Defense's legal team. Marcus has known you're a billionaire since before the divorce. The implications exploded through Harrison's mind. Every move Sterling had made had been calculated with full knowledge of Harrison's resources. Why didn't he use it? Because his strategy depends on you revealing yourself. He's planning media offensive. Stories about eccentric billionaire who deceived his wife, lived double life. He'll flip the narrative, make you the villain when you file FAA complaint. The recording, did you get him admitting to this? Every word, him explaining to the family how he'll destroy your reputation, paint you as unstable billionaire who can't be trusted. And Harrison, you need to hear what else he said. About his father, about why he's desperate. Send me secure email. I'll upload everything. Victoria, can you go home? Her voice dropped. No. Marcus knows I was recording. He saw me leave early, figured it out. He's furious, threatening legal action. I need somewhere to stay tonight. Before Harrison could respond, Madison grabbed the phone. Come here. To our house. You're not industrial spy, you're whistleblower. And whatever else happened, you're still family until the divorce is final. We protect family. Harrison heard Victoria's breath catch. Madison, I don't deserve. Nobody's asking what you deserve. I'm telling you what's happening. Pack a bag. Come to the house. 40 minutes later, Victoria's Lexus pulled into the driveway. She emerged with single suitcase and haunted expression. Harrison met her at the door. Thank you for this. Thank Madison. This was her call. They settled in the living room, Victoria in the armchair she'd occupied for 5 years, Harrison and Madison on the couch. Victoria pulled out her phone. Before we listen, I need to warn you. My mother said cruel things about you, about Madison, about blue-collar people. It's going to be hard to hear. Madison's jaw set. We can handle hard truths. Play it. The recording began with ambient dinner noise. Margaret Sterling's voice emerged first, cultured and cold. Victoria, darling, now that you've extricated yourself from that unfortunate marriage, we need to discuss your future at Sterling. Victoria's recorded voice responded tentatively. Mother, about Harrison, there are things you should know. The engine design. Marcus's voice cut in, smooth and condescending. Victoria, we've been over this. The consultant's claims are baseless. He's a disgruntled amateur punching above his weight. Let the lawyers handle it. Marcus, he's not what? Not a mechanic with delusions of engineering competence? Victoria, you're too kind. The man trapped you in marriage hoping to leech off Sterling connections. We're doing you a favor. Harrison's hands clenched. Madison put a restraining hand on his arm. In fact, I've been looking into Mr. Drake's background. Very interesting things emerge when you dig. Did you know he filed his patent through corporate legal team? Drake Aerospace Defense's legal team, specifically. Margaret Sterling's voice sharpened. The defense contractor? Why would they represent a Brooks Aviation consultant? Because Harrison Drake isn't a consultant. He's the CEO of Drake Aerospace Defense. Net worth $8.2 billion. Has been playing poor mechanic for 5 years. Silence, then Margaret's shocked gasp. Victoria, you were married to a billionaire and didn't know it? Victoria's voice came small. How long have you known this? 6 months, since I found out you were living in Connecticut. But I didn't know he was a billionaire until 3 months ago, when the patent filing came through Drake Aerospace's legal team. That changed everything. Before, you were just my sister wasting time with blue-collar nobody. After, you were my unwitting access to billionaires' proprietary technology. Caroline Sterling's voice joined. But Marcus, if he's that wealthy, won't he simply buy Sterling? Marcus's laughter carried genuine amusement. He can't. If Drake Aerospace Defense acquires Sterling, it triggers antitrust concerns. He'd face years of regulatory scrutiny, not worth his time, which means we're safe to proceed. Safe to do what? Destroy him. I've got media contacts ready to run stories about eccentric billionaire who psychologically tortured his wife, conducted bizarre social experiment. By the time I'm done, Harrison Drake will be laughingstock, and his lawsuit will look like revenge fantasy from emotionally disturbed CEO. The recording continued, Marcus detailing his strategy with clinical precision. Then Victoria's recorded voice changed, hardening. And what about the engines, Marcus? What about the thermal management problems Ryan Garrett documented? The silence stretched. Then Marcus responded, voice cold. What did you say? The EcoJet engines, the temperature spikes during testing, the cooling passage deficiencies. That's classified information. How do you know about Garrett's report? Because I'm Director of Research and Development, and I accessed your files when you locked me out of the program. Marcus, those engines are dangerous. They'll fail in service. People will die. Marcus's voice dropped to dangerous quiet. People will die if Sterling goes bankrupt. 3,000 employees lose jobs. Dad's legacy disappears. I'm not letting that happen because of theoretical thermal issues we can address in production. They're not theoretical. Garrett nearly crashed the simulator. Garrett is overcautious. Our engineers believe the issues are manageable. Which engineers? The ones you haven't told about the problems? Marcus, I've read the internal memos. You ordered test data deleted. You suppressed Garrett's report. You're knowingly manufacturing defective engines. Chair scraping, footsteps, then Marcus's voice close and threatening. You're recording this, aren't you? Victoria's gasp, rustling sounds, then her voice defiant. Yes, because someone needs to stop you from killing people. You treacherous bitch. You're just like him, thinking you're a hero while destroying everything Dad built. Get out. You're dead to this family. More sounds, Victoria leaving, door slamming. The recording continued, picking up Margaret Sterling's voice. Marcus, what have you done? If she has evidence, then we destroy her credibility, same as we're destroying his. Bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. Nobody will believe her. The recording ended. Harrison, Madison, and Victoria sat in silence. Harrison's mind was already moving, cataloging evidence, building strategy. The recording was damning. Marcus confessing to theft, acknowledging safety risks, outlining his plan to weaponize Harrison's identity against him. Combined with Ryan's test data and the patent timestamps, this wasn't just a winnable case. This was airtight. But winning wasn't the question anymore. The question was how many lives hung in the balance while they fought through legal process. 80 engines, Pacific Airways' entire regional fleet, 300 passengers per aircraft, multiple flights daily. The math was brutal. He looked at Victoria, his ex-wife who wasn't quite his ex-wife yet, the woman who'd lied about everything except, apparently, loving him. She just burned every bridge to her past life. Family, fortune, career, all of it gone the moment she'd pressed record. That took a kind of courage Harrison wasn't sure he possessed. Victoria was crying quietly, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I'm sorry you had to hear that. Madison's voice came fierce. They underestimated us. They think money and status make them untouchable. They're about to learn differently. Harrison was already texting Mitchell Carson and Laura Brennan. That recording is everything we need. Marcus admitting to suppressing safety data, acknowledging thermal problems, confessing to knowing endangerment. The FAA will have to act immediately. Victoria wiped her eyes. There's more on the full file. Marcus discussing how he plans to use Pacific Airways' contract as leverage. Get engines into service before investigation concludes. Make grounding them politically impossible. He's counting on bureaucratic inertia and airline industry pressure to protect him. Harrison pulled up his laptop, opened the secure cloud link Victoria sent. The full recording was 90 minutes, containing not just the dinner conversation, but Marcus's private discussion with Sterling's board afterward. laying out his complete strategy for managing the Drake situation. As they listened, a picture emerged of a man driven not by pure greed, but by desperate fear. Fear of failing his father's legacy. Fear of being the Sterling who destroyed what Howard Sterling had built. Fear of facing 3,000 employees and admitting he'd bankrupted their livelihoods through incompetence and hubris. It didn't excuse Marcus's actions, but it explained them in ways that made him tragic figure rather than pure villain. When the recording finished, Madison spoke first. He's not evil. He's just a coward who convinced himself that the ends justify the means. Victoria nodded. My father built Sterling on integrity. Marcus is trying to save it through corruption. Dad would have shut down the company himself rather than manufacture engines he knew were unsafe. Harrison closed the laptop. Tomorrow we file with the FAA. Full safety complaint with all supporting evidence. Ryan's test data, the expert thermal analysis, Marcus's recorded confession. Sterling will be grounded within 48 hours. And then I reveal my real identity on my terms, before Marcus can weaponize it. Press conference explaining why I lived anonymously, what I discovered about Sterling's theft and safety violations, why I'm coming forward now. Control the narrative. Madison was already drafting press release, her fingers flying across keyboard. I'll have this ready by morning. We'll need to coordinate with Drake Aerospace Defense's PR team. Prepare for media firestorm. Victoria stood, exhaustion evident in every movement. I should let you two work. Where should I? Guest room, Madison said firmly. Top of stairs, second door on the left. There are towels in the bathroom. You're safe here. After Victoria went upstairs, Harrison and Madison worked into the early morning hours, preparing the documentation that would end Marcus Sterling's gambit and expose 5 years of carefully maintained fiction. At 2 a.m., Madison finally closed her laptop. Dad, are you ready for what comes next? Once you reveal who you are, everything changes. No more anonymity, no more simple life as consultant. Harrison thought about the question, about the 5 years he'd spent trying to escape the weight of running Drake Aerospace Defense, about the genuine engineering work he'd done at Brooks Aviation, about the relationship he'd built with Victoria on foundations that turned out to be mutual deception. I thought I wanted to be someone else. Turns out I just wanted to be myself without the burden of expectations. Maybe the lesson is that you can't escape who you are by pretending to be someone else. You can only accept it and find the parts worth keeping. Madison hugged him. That's very philosophical for 2 in the morning. Sleep deprivation makes me profound. Or punchy, get some rest. Tomorrow we change everything. Harrison climbed the stairs, pausing outside the guest room where light showed under the door. He knocked softly. Come in. Victoria sat on the bed, still dressed, laptop open. She looked up as he entered. Couldn't sleep either? Too much adrenaline, too many thoughts. Harrison sat in the chair by the window. We're both fools, you know. Spent 5 years testing each other's authenticity while building lives on lies. The irony would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. Victoria's laugh held no humor. At least we failed together. That's something. Is it enough? She met his eyes. I don't know, but I know I want to find out. After this is over, after the legal battles and media circus and everything else, I want to see if there's anything real underneath all the wreckage we created. Harrison felt something shift in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it somewhere in the future. I'd like that too. But Victoria, no more lies, no more roles, just us, whoever we actually are. Deal. Though I should warn you, the real me is probably a lot less interesting than the performance. The real you recorded your brother confessing to crimes, risked your family and career to prevent mass casualties, and is planning to become high school physics teacher. That's plenty interesting. She smiled, genuine warmth breaking through the exhaustion. Get some sleep, Harrison. Tomorrow we blow up both our worlds. They were already blown up. Tomorrow we just make it official. He stood to leave, paused at the door. For what it's worth, I believe you loved us, Madison and me. I believe that was real. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. It was the only real thing I had. Harrison closed the door, left her with that small piece of absolution. Down the hall, he found Madison still awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with laptop and phone. Everything okay? Yeah, just preparing for war. We're not going to war, sweetheart. We're going to tell the truth. Sometimes that's harder. She looked up and Harrison saw Jennifer's wisdom in their daughter's eyes. Dad, when this is over, when Sterling is dealt with and the media moves on, are you going to try again with Victoria? Would that bother you? Madison considered the question seriously. She hurt us. She lied. But she's also trying to fix it, trying to be better. I think people deserve second chances when they earn them. The question is whether she's earning it or just trying to avoid consequences. That's a very mature perspective. I have a very good role model. Now go to bed. We have a billionaire CEO to reveal tomorrow. Harrison kissed her forehead, retreated to his own bedroom. As he lay in the darkness, he thought about the 5 years of fiction he'd constructed, about Victoria's parallel deception, about the strange symmetry of two people hiding their true selves while searching for authentic connection. Tomorrow it would all come out, the truth about his identity, about Sterling's theft, about engines that threatened hundreds of lives. Tomorrow the carefully maintained fiction would collapse under the weight of reality. But tonight, in this quiet house with his daughter down the hall and the woman he'd loved sleeping in the guest room, Harrison Drake allowed himself to hope that sometimes the wreckage of broken things could be rebuilt into something stronger than the original. Sometimes the truth, however painful, was the foundation you needed to build something real.